So let's get started displaying one movie with a GraphQL call in the front-end source code. And that's where I am right now. And as you might expect, this file, onemovie.js, which is our component for displaying a movie, it's virtually identical to what we're going to need when we make a GraphQL call. What will change, of course, is on the component didMount function. But this is a good starting point. So I'm going to select all this code, copy it, close this file, and I'll create a new component, so a new file, and I'll call it onemovieGraphQL.js, which is not terribly inventive, but will serve our purpose. So I'll now paste all the code I just copied in there and go back up and change the class name to onemovieGraphQL. And here in the component didMount function, we need to make some changes. So what I'm going to do to save some time is go to the GraphQL.js and I'll copy its entire call to the back end. So everything here from line 47 in my code down to here, which is the fetch statement. So I'm going to copy that and go back to my onemovieGraphQL.js and replace this entire fetch statement with what I need, or what my starting point is anyway. Okay, so we definitely want headers. So my headers equals new headers. We definitely want the content type, application JSON, even though this isn't actually accurate or valid JSON. That will set the content type appropriately for our backend. And then we have our request options, which will be post and payload and my headers. Now we need that payload variable. So let's go back to GraphQL.js and just copy a payload as a starting point. So this is our starting point for payload. So I'll copy this and go back to onemovieGraphQL and paste my payload in there, like that. Okay. And now let's fix this. Of course, we're not using the search directive from our backend. We can go look at our backend code right here. So the one we want, and this is GraphQL.go in the backend code, it's this one, movie. So that's our directive or our action, and it has one argument, ID. So let's go back to our front end code and change this from search to movie. And not title contains, we want ID. And ID is actually an integer, so we don't use double quotes because that will tell everyone that it's a string. And we don't want this.state.search term. If you recall, this actually comes from our props. It's an argument passed to us by the React router. So we want this.props.match.params, better spell match right, params.id. And we're going to get more than ID, title, runtime, year, and description. We may as well grab release date and rating and MPAA rating. And that's enough for now, I think. That gives us pretty much everything we need for our purposes at the moment. Then down here, we're not going to get the list. We actually don't need this at all. We can delete this one. We don't need that one at all. We're getting our response JSON, which we'll call data. And we'll get rid of this entirely, the console log. And our movies variable will come from json.data, but this time it's not list and it's not search, it's the name of our action, which is movie. Okay, and movies, this should be movie singular. And we can just get rid of this else altogether. So get rid of that, and get rid of this. And we're calling this data, so this should be data.json, data.data.movie. There. All right, and of course we have to close our function. Let's format this whole thing. That looks right. We have no errors showing. Okay, and back up here we have state movie is loaded false and error. And down here we're getting a post. That's the correct URL. And I think that's everything we need at this point. Okay, so that should be, unless we miss something, all that we need right now in onemovieGraphQL.js. So now, of course, we need to route to it in app.js. And what we'll do is come down here. We're not going to have anything in our menu that appears on the left, so this part can stay the same. But we do want to route it to our component. So I'm going to duplicate this line, and I'll just change the URL to GraphQL, movies GraphQL, movies GraphQL : ID. And the component will be onemovie GraphQL, and I'll let my IDE import that for me. Now we'll go back to our list of movies that we're getting, and that's in GraphQL.js, and find the part where we're actually showing the movies, listing them, which is right down here. And we just need to change this A to a link. So I'll use link and let my IDE import it for me, hopefully. There. Give it a closing link instead of a closing A. And the href becomes 2. And then the actual path name that we want to link to, in curly brackets with backticks, is movies, M-O-V-I-E-S, GraphQL, /$ and m.id. And if everything worked as expected, let's make sure it compiled. Good. Let's go back to our web browser and click on GraphQL and try clicking on, say, The Dark Knight. And it gives me a loading because I didn't set my loading variable. Let's go back to our code, bring up one movie, and we're saying is loaded. So at this point, we also want to say is loaded is true. Let's save that, go back and try it again, and there it is. So I can go to GraphQL, click on the Shawshank Redemption, and there it is. So there, that's simple enough to get the information using GraphQL. Now, in the next lecture, we'll make the changes to the database structure to allow for a movie poster, and we'll make changes to the back-end code that will actually request that information and send it to the end user when they try to display an individual movie. And that might take a couple of lectures, but we'll get started in the next one.